Once they were some of the most advanced structures and facilities on the planet, at the cutting edge of engineering design and construction. Today, they stand abandoned, contaminated, and sometimes deadly. Their empty buildings and infrastructures are full of the echoes of real people and vanished lives, leaving many questions unanswered and mysteries unsolved. In this episode, we explore some of the world's strangest abandoned roads and transport links, and ask, why did Italy's survival in World War I come to depend on a narrow track cut into a sheer cliff face?
The whole road was built in 9 months at altitude with limited resources whilst under attack, and it would have saved thousands of lives.
What mistakes led to the construction of the most devastated road in the whole of Britain?
It gives us a very, very clear reminder that things can go wrong, and this is how awfully they can go wrong as well. And that sticks in your mind.
Why is one of France's greatest tourist attractions now too dangerous to visit?
Builders of the Grand Goulet achieved something far greater than they ever imagined. It was inspirational, it was romantic, and everybody wanted to journey on it.
And how an American businessman won a bet by building a desert road made only of wood.
It's a beautiful kind of American sheer audacity of taking on such a project. Yeah, why not? Of course I'm going to do it. Nothing's too much of a problem for me. A road through the desert? Hell yeah.
We use them every day and take them for granted. But roads are a vital part of our world, for trade, travel, and communication. But sometimes building a road is not just a question of economics, it's a matter of life or death. One of the most astonishing roads in Europe was all that stood between a nation's survival and crushing defeat. Mount Vesubio towers 8,000 feet above the Venetian plain in northern Italy. Snaking across its sheer cliffs is a network of tunnels, roads, and what seems to be just a narrow and treacherous goat path. This is the 52 Tunnel Road. But how did it come to play a vital role in World War I?
So during wartime, things are obviously very, very fraught. You're under a huge amount of pressure.
Those are the times when engineers have made what might seem impossible, possible. Under attack, at altitude, in a limited time, 9 months it took for them to build this.
And that does tend to push engineers to create things very quickly and think on your feet and get on with stuff that you might not normally when it's peacetime.
It's an amazing achievement. It's an amazing engineering achievement and should be recognized as such.
It wasn't until 1915 that Italy finally chose sides and entered the First World War to fight its rival, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. But its combat wouldn't take place in the muddy trenches. Its battles were in the freezing mountain peaks.
Well, most of the fighting the Italians do during the First World War is in the mountains that border Austria-Hungary. And as a result of this, it's known as the White War. Of course, in many cases, they were actually fighting above the snow line. Now, the logistical challenges that presented and the natural, formidable obstacles that mountains are to the movement of military troops meant that there wasn't actually a lot of gain on either side.
High in the Alps, the Italian and Austrian armies became locked in a battle of attrition. Men struggled to survive in a barren landscape where freezing temperatures and avalanches took hundreds of lives. In 1916, an Austrian attack captured the peaks on either side of Mount Vesubio, leaving a direct route to Venice exposed. Dr. Manuel Grotto is a former member of Italy's elite mountain troops, the Alpini. He's an expert on this brutal war that was fought above the clouds.
Questa era la montagna che segnava la fine della pianura e l'inizio delle Alpi. E quindi se gli austriaci avessero sfondato il fronte sarebbero dilagati nella pianura veneta e avrebbero conquistato Venezia.
By 1916, having fought to and fro along the Isonzo River, which is effectively in the northeast of Italy, the main battlefield switches to the Trentino front, which is a little bit further west. And the Austrians actually managed to break through there in an expedition known as the Strafe Expedition. And it's as a result of this that the mountains on the edge of the Venetian plains suddenly become vitally, strategically important.
From the peaks near Vesubio, the Austrians had the only road to its summit squarely in their sights.
Che ha contrapposto 1 milione di soldati, 600.000 italiani, 400.000 austriaci. E gli austriaci sono avanzati da quella parte e hanno impedito, prendendo quella montagna, di utilizzare questa che era la strada che i soldati italiani usavano per arrivare in prima linea. E questo è il motivo per cui è stata realizzata la strada delle 52 gallerie.
The question facing the Italian commanders was how could they get men and supplies to defend the vital mountain without them being blown to pieces on the way? The only possible answer was to build a new road across the mountain's sheer cliffs.
In times of war, it can often come down to engineers to make the impossible possible. No, it can't be done is not an acceptable answer. And it's by no mistake or by no accident that in the past, huge leaps in technology and engineering have happened in times of conflict. So when it comes down to something like the 52-tunnel road, maybe it's not as well recognized as it should be as the feat of engineering for what it is, considering the conditions under which it was done.
With immense effort, Italian army engineers were able to construct a simple gravel road that zigzagged up one spur of Vesubio in a series of terrifying hairpin bends. It was only wide enough for a single truck, and drivers faced certain death if they lost control. It still wasn't enough. To get more men and supplies to the summit, they needed to cut another road across Vesubio's sheer southern cliffs, and even through the mountain itself.
Gli ingegneri si sono divisi i tratti da costruire e sono riusciti tratto per tratto a collegare la strada dalla partenza a 1200 metri fino all'arrivo che è quasi 2000 metri.
The soldiers given the job of building the road were former miners and quarrymen, many of them too old for service in the front line. Their battle would be against the mountain itself. Where the cliff was too steep to cut a ledge, they had no choice but to dig tunnel after tunnel, 52 of them in all.
Yes, they're soldiers in name, but really they're not combat men, and yet this is an active combat zone that was being zeroed in by Austrian artillery, which is why the road had to be built in the first place. But the logistical task that they actually carried out and the danger of actually doing it, the means by which they would actually create this road and these tunnels. I mean, you've only got to walk on it today to see what a hazardous undertaking just moving along it would have been. Forget about actually building it in the first place when there's nothing, literally nothing in front of you. I mean, you have nothing but extraordinary admiration for the men who did it. And were they recognized with bravery medals? I suspect not, yet they probably should have been.
The Italian engineers were in a race against time. Could they finish the road before the next Austrian attack? One crucial piece of equipment gave them a chance: the pneumatic drill, or jackhammer.
Jackhammers, or pneumatic drills, came about in the late 19th century. And when it came to tunneling and road building, it made the whole process so much more efficient. Previously, it was physical labor with chisels and hammering away at the chisels to break away the rock, either to get the rock away or to make holes to drop explosive charges into to blow your way through. A jackhammer is effectively a hammer and a chisel combined. Using compressed air, you can hammer away really, really quickly at that rock face.
You're working 2,000 feet up in the air on the side of a rocky mountain, and you're creating what ends up to be quite a narrow path, enough for 2 mules to pass on. But it was such an incredibly important part of the war effort, because otherwise the country would have basically been split into half, and it would have caused a major, major issue to the military, that it just had to get done.
And so time was of the essence, and the jackhammer allowed them to do that and to make something that was purely functional, but do it quickly.
The drills were used to bore holes for explosive charges that would blast away slabs of rock.
Nelle gallerie si vedono anche ancora tutti i buchi che le perforatrici hanno realizzato, che venivano poi riempiti di esplosivo, e quindi l'esplosione permetteva la costruzione della galleria.
It took 9 months of relentless struggle to cut the 4-mile-long road through the solid rock of Vesubio. To save time, it was only made wide enough for 2 pack mules to pass each other. And even on the highest part, no guardrails were installed. Would the 52-tunnel road save lives, or be just too dangerous to use?
The whole road was built in 9 months at altitude with limited resources whilst under attack, and it would have saved thousands of lives.
In 1918, with the 52-tunnel road acting as a vital lifeline, the Italians were at last able to drive the Austrians back and remove the threat to their heartland. When the war ended, this extraordinary road across Mount Vesubio gradually disappeared as rockfalls blocked its tunnels and pathways. And it's now shut to all but the most determined walkers, despite the huge effort in forging the tunnels at the time. But the men who built it left a memorial to the back-breaking efforts that turned the tide of the war.
I think the engineers achieved a huge amount in that very short space of time. So where they've got this beautiful ornamental concrete arch with their motto, it's justifiable.
In latino riportare questo nome. Ex ardus perpetuum nome, che significa che il nome di chi fa delle opere grandi verrà ricordato per sempre.
The 52-tunnel road was not the only Alpine route that stretched its engineers' abilities to the limit. In the mountains above Grenoble in southern France, another road was carved out of the solid rock of a cliff face. This time, it was built not for war, but for trade with isolated mountain villages. Its name soon became famous all over the country: the Grand Goulet, or the Great Bottlenecks. But why is such an incredible feat of engineering vision now left closed and crumbling? And how did the engineers develop a highly dangerous system for carving out the road?
The builders of the Grand Goulet achieved something far greater than they ever imagined.
It's kind of man meets nature in this beautiful way, and the Grand Goulet is a beautiful example of that. And it's something that you won't see anywhere else. It's totally unique.
You've got valleys, you've got peaks, you've got different materials, you've got outcrops, you've got rivers changing the course of what the mountains actually look like.
Building roads around mountain passes and tunnels is a real challenge and a real difficulty. The Grand Goulet was built over 150 years ago when none of that technology was around, yet they still managed it.
Looming thousands of feet above the Rhône River in southern France is the Vercors Plateau. For centuries, the sheer cliffs cutting it off from the lowlands made it a kind of lost world. In the mid-19th century, farmers and villagers living up on the plateau demanded a road to connect them with the markets in the towns below. But the obstacles were immense. Surrounded by granite cliffs and sheer-sided gorges, the Vercors Valley is a natural fortress. Finding a way through its defenses was no easy task. Local authority road workers Pierre Drogue and Jean-Marc Lant know firsthand just how difficult and dangerous an engineering project it was.
En fait, c'était vraiment un chantier, le chantier du siècle, on peut dire, pour ici. Et un désenclavement complet pour le plateau du Vercors, pour le commerce, parce que bon, il y avait les forêts en haut et le reste des commerces se trouvait dans le Royan. Ça permet un libre-échange de marchandises avec des charrettes derrière les chevaux, alors qu'avant, il n'y avait que des passages dans les rochers où les mules pouvaient passer juste avec derrière quelqu'un. Voilà, c'était très important comme ouverture de route.
Over thousands of years, a mountain river called the Venaison had cut a narrow channel through the cliffs. But using it as the path of a road was easier said than done.
The start of the Grand Goulet road follows a part of a natural erosion where water, a river, had previously gone through. Now, water will always take the path of least resistance. So maybe following nature in its way of tunneling and eroding, creating its own passage, is a good idea. But then you also have to think about, well, hang on, if this is the path of least resistance, what is the geology that I've got around us here? So it's a tricky one to know whether that was the right or the wrong thing to do. But it's still there, it's still up.
Work started in 1846 to cut a tunnel alongside the river. But after a few hundred yards, it abruptly changes course and drops to the bottom of the gorge. Now, the engineers faced another challenge. They had to cut a road into the vertical cliff face ahead.
You've got rock above you and down one side, but then you've still got that sheer drop. It's like an open-sided tunnel.
The engineers developed a technique that seems almost suicidal. Men would drop down the cliff face on ropes, chisel a hole for the explosive charge, light the fuse, then swing out of the way while it went off. It was extremely dangerous work.
Would they have any better ways of doing it? At the time, really hard to say. They probably could have done it manually with, picks and axes and so on. And of course, that would have taken much, much longer to do. So I guess they chose the more risky but quick option to build this road.
The construction methods used to build the Grand Goulet road would have a health and safety officer today in a cold sweat. Every single day when these guys went to work, there was a huge risk that they might not come back.
It took 6 years of back-breaking work to complete the crucial 2-mile-long stretch of the Grand Goulet. But the new road changed life dramatically for the villagers on the Vercors Plateau. Its breathtaking views and easy access from the valleys below made it one of the most popular tourist destinations in southern France.
The Grand Goulet set out to be a commercial road from the get-go, connecting villages in the mountain to the rest of the world. But as soon as it was constructed, as soon as men finished risking their lives by hanging on with one hand and doing explosives with the other just to go 10 meters further, it was something special. It was romantic, it was inspiring, and people were obsessed about traveling on it.
I'm not sure the engineers involved in building the Grand Goulet Road knew that they were creating a kind of artistic and cultural masterpiece at the time. But when you look back on it, now it is something of beauty. There is something of kind of mystique, and it has a huge artistic value to it. And I think that's one of the beauties of engineering.
But problems soon started for the Grand Goulet. Constructed just wide enough for 2 horse-drawn wagons to pass each other, it had trouble coping with cars, buses, and trucks. When the engineers tried to widen it, they realized a crucial mistake had been made.
The Grand Goulet Road is quite narrow, and there's good reason for that. There's no reinforcement in the tunnels or in the kind of open tunnels that you go through as you make your way along the side of the mountain. And so you're limited to how wide you can take the road because you're not reinforcing the rock above you.
To widen it, that would have been really challenging. They would have had to really think about, well, how do we support this rock? And that can be very, very difficult, especially at the time with trying to transport material there to create frames to maybe hold the rock face up. You're then almost coming into that tunneling type of territory, which maybe at the time was just a little bit beyond what they were trying to actually achieve.
As the years went on, faster, bigger cars turned the road's curves into death traps. Then in 2000 and again in 2005, nature itself played its hand. Whole sections of cliff came down onto the road.
Alors, nous arrivons là dans les Grands Goulets où les plus importants éboulements ont eu lieu dans les années 2000-2005. Le premier éboulement s'est produit en haut sur la gauche et le deuxième s'est produit en dessus de notre tête.
In 2005, after 150 years, the decision was taken to close the road.
Maybe closing the road is not the only solution. Maybe they could reinforce all the rock above it and make sure that there's zero risk of rockfall. But by doing so, you kind of sanitize the whole area and you make it something very different. You've modernized it and you've shut down the element of risk. And I think the beauty, the intrinsic beauty that the road has would be lost. So for me, I think it will remain a closed road. And part of me is sad about that because I'd love to go up there, but I'd be scared because it's not safe.
Building roads and lines of communication might appear easy from an engineering perspective. However, lying forgotten on the side of a sheer-sided hill in Derbyshire, in northern England, is the most ruined road in the whole of the British Isles. The Mam Tor road was built in the 19th century, but today it looks like it was torn apart by an earthquake. So what exactly happened to the shivering mountain road as it's become known?
I don't know how advanced geology was back when the road at Mam Tor was built, but you can see there's a landslide that's happened there.
It gives us a very, very clear reminder that things can go wrong, and this is how awfully they can go wrong as well. And that sticks in your mind.
The story of the Mam Tor road began during Britain's very first global conflict, the Napoleonic War.
This is 1809. This is at a time where the outcome is still very much in the balance, and Britain's role at this stage is not so much supplying soldiers, although the numbers of soldiers that it was supplying were increasing all the time. It was really the industrial powerhouse and the exchequer of the alliance that was fighting this live and death struggle against Napoleon, really the First World War. And therefore, it would have been incumbent on communities like Castleton to have shifted their goods as quickly and as efficiently as possible to nearby markets to drive this industrial powerhouse. The need to build this road must have been directly linked to the war effort.
In 1819, the road builders began cutting a road from the town of Castleton to the city of Sheffield. Commercial interests had made the new road vital.
During the Industrial Revolution in Britain, there was industry popping up all over the country, but that industry was entirely dependent on the goods and materials coming in and going out. Transportation networks were critical.
So without the new roads, without the railway, without these new canals that had been dug around and this huge network that basically joined the whole country and made it one country, the Industrial Revolution just simply couldn't have happened.
These were the veins and the arteries that pumped life into the Industrial Revolution. You couldn't have one without the other.
But there was a problem. Separating Castleton from Sheffield is a range of steep hills. If a new road had a steep gradient up these hills, it would be almost unusable by the horse-drawn wagons of the day.
There's a certain limitation as to how steep a road you can get a horse to draw an enormous, heavy load up. Mam Tor was chosen as a route because of the natural lie of the land. It had a much gentler slope, so as they could snake their way up, getting over the problem of having too steep roads. It was a road that horses could go up. But little did they know, because of the geology around it, it was probably the worst place they could have built it.
So how could the road builders get around the gradient problem? It was decided to route the new road across the side of a 1,700-foot hill called Mam Tor. A slope on the hillside made it possible to build the road in gentle curves. But the slope should have been a clue to a critical flaw in their planning. The road's planners simply didn't understand the area's underlying geology, a major factor in planning road networks today.
So understanding the geology is so important because at the end of the day, you can have a really strong road surface there, but if what's holding that up is really weak and not fit for purpose, then that strong road is not going to do anything useful.
Even for road builders today, the geology and the environment where you're going to place your road is probably the most important factor. You need to know how to deal with the geology and the environment that you've got so that you've got a nice, solid, secure road that's going to stay there.
The local name for Mam Tor is the Shivering Mountain and is a clue to the fact that the whole hill lies on top of a layer of shale. It stands out a mile that the scar is evidence of an old landslip. However solid it looks, the underlying shale on Mam Tor means that one side is in constant motion, especially in periods of heavy rain. The whole side of the hill is moving slowly towards Castleton at a rate of 1/4 meter a year.
You've got the road, which is built on a layer of sandstone, and underneath that is a layer of shale. Now, shale is extremely unstable, especially in wintertime, when you've got rainwater and precipitation draining down through the sandstone and making that layer of shale really quite fluid almost. So that is the critical factor at Mam Tor.
All too soon, the Mam Tor road began to split and buckle as the surface of the hill continued moving. For much of the 19th century, the repairs were fairly simple. But when the road surface was tarmacked, things became more complicated.
So the introduction of tarmac made it easier to actually repair the surface of the road because you could come and mix the rocks with this kind of bitumen, sticky material and create a nice solid surface. But the problem again here is that the bottom of it, the foundations are just simply slipping away. So it doesn't matter how good your surface is on top. If the bottom's not strong enough, then the top's not going to do very much.
But even with the new road surface, the slope kept moving.
Over time, there have been a number of attempts to try and shore up the road to stop it from slipping away. The biggest of those, probably in 1949, there was a big slippage. So what they did, they dug further back into the hillside, and then on the lower side of the road, built up the road with a load of limestone on top.
It actually made things worse, because not only had they cut into the geology and actually encouraged for more sliding to happen, they then also overloaded the road surface, and all that happened was the whole thing started moving in a way that they hadn't even seen before.
By putting a load more mass on the kind of outer edge, there was even more slippage. It's almost like sticking a huge weight off the wrong side of the tower, Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's gonna go. They were helping it. And again, if they knew what they were doing now, they probably wouldn't have done it.
Eventually, continuing landslips forced the local authorities to run out of patience. They closed the Mam Tor road to all traffic in 1979.
So there was a decision made to shelve it because it was just getting to a stage where it was completely unusable. And I guess the balance you need to find is, well, how much is it going to cost to create a new road and just completely bypass what's there and what's been destroyed? And how much is it going to cost to fix the original pathway? And if the new one is actually cheaper and perhaps even better for the environment than trying to fix this old one, then you go for the new one.
But there becomes a point where you just have to say, do you know what? Enough's enough. Nature's beaten us. Let's close it.
Unstable bedrock may present a challenge to road builders, but terrain where the whole surface is in motion takes things to a whole new level. One of the most extraordinary roads ever constructed crosses a sandy landscape, which constantly threatened to bury the engineer's best efforts. And it was all because of a bet. The Old Plank Road is a vital 7-mile stretch of the route between San Diego in California and Phoenix in Arizona, across a harsh desert landscape. But just how was it done? And did the achievement stand the test of time?
There was no road through that desert for a very good reason. Roads and deserts, they're not that compatible.
Deserts are very, very dynamic landscapes. You've got wind, you've got these sand dunes, and when they interact with each other, it just completely changes the surface. Things move, they get lower, they get higher. So trying to build a road on that seems like a pretty crazy thing to do.
When it comes to the plank road, it's almost like the simplest idea was the best. We're dealing with fast-moving, shifting sands. That's the surface on which they're trying to build a road. And when you think about a road, you think it as something solid, something that doesn't move. With the sand continuously moving, they needed something that was going to be a little bit flexible. It's a very simple idea, but maybe it was that simplicity which actually meant that it worked.
In 1912, Los Angeles became the terminus of America's transcontinental railroad. But without any direct connecting routes to the east, nearby San Diego faced becoming an economic backwater, blocked by an expansive desert which was considered impassable. But one local businessman was determined to stop his city being bypassed. His name was Ed Fletcher, and he demanded that the Southern California Road Network use San Diego as its hub. As a result, a Los Angeles newspaper challenged Fletcher to take part in a road race to see which city had fastest road connection to the Arizona capital, Phoenix. He gave one of the LA newspaper's reporters a 24-hour head start. And incredibly, it was Fletcher who made it to Phoenix first, in just 19.5 hours.
Ed Fletcher is one of these great unsung American heroes. He takes the initiative, He sees the challenge and he seizes it. Let's build a road across the desert. Oh, really? How are you going to do that? Wooden planks. Is that the best idea? He does it anyways. People think California is full of crazy people. Well, you know what? Maybe they always were, but you have to admire that ambition.
It's a beautiful kind of American sheer audacity of taking on such a project. Yeah, why not? Of course I'm going to do it. Nothing's too much of a problem for me. A road through the desert? Hell yeah.
Even though he had won his bet, how could Fletcher turn San Diego into a real road hub? His answer was to ship in 13,000 wooden planks and create a 7-mile wooden highway across the desert.
It's planks laid out through the desert, which is the kind of solution I might have come up with as like a 7-year-old thinking about it. But it's the fact that they laid this out, 13,000 planks, laid one after the other, after the other, after the other, which you might say, hang on, that's just not possible. For Ed Fletcher, anything was possible.
It makes you wonder where he got the idea from, because most of the wooden roads that had been built prior to this would have had a military purpose. We know that many corduroy roads were built out of wood during the US Civil War. And then, of course, in the First World War, at the same time that this road was being built, the military of all nations, particularly the British in the Ypres salient, were building temporary roads. It's probable that he was aware of this, but the twist is that this is not just temporary. This is actually there to last. And it's pretty extraordinary to think that this relatively simple structure was intended to survive more than just a year or two.
Amazingly, Fletcher's improvised road was so successful that in 1915 it was incorporated into California's state highway system.
If I'd picked up a map back then and navigated my way to San Diego and it happened to take in the Plank Road, to get there and actually see literal planks forming the road, I think I would have been extremely shocked. It's not what you'd expect.
It's completely bizarre and utterly surprising to me that 2 planks of wood in this moving sand desert can be part of a highway. I mean, it's incredible. I think there's a lot to learn from that, because sometimes engineering solutions can be fairly simple on the face of it, but it does seem a little bit mad.
For 10 years, the plank road was in constant use, not only by local traffic, but also by tourists who came to enjoy the incredibly bumpy ride across the desert.
Fletcher's Plank Road becomes a success because it's a novelty. It's the path less taken. It's an adventure. People want to drive on it. They know it's going to be an experience, and that's what it's all about. It's sort of the original thrill seekers. People would brag to each other, "Have you been on the Plank Road?" "I have. It's amazing." And everybody wanted to do it.
Fletcher had proved his point, and the road was here to stay. He even improved on his 2 parallel planks design with a solid wooden surface.
So I love the quite clearly iterative process that the designers and the engineers went through here, from the 2 parallel rows of planks that you have to keep your wheels onto, to the continuous rows of planks just laid out in front of you as a more solid structure.
Having the solid surface versus the 2 sets of plank definitely takes it a step better, but at the end of the day, you still have the same problem that the landscape changes very dramatically within the matter of hours. So we really do need to understand what we're dealing with. How much wind is there? How much is the sand moving? Where is it the worst? Where is it the best? And once you have a thorough understanding of what you're dealing with, then you come up with the right solution for the answer. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
And in 1926, the correct solution was to replace the wooden planks with a professional asphalt surface built up on a sandbank.
Analysis was done on the moving sand, and it was found that the sands moved a lot more when it was lower. Anything that was raised up slightly was less susceptible to the moving sands. And so when the more permanent road was put in with an asphalt surface, that was put in on a kind of raised bank, whereas the plank, the original plank road, was right down where all the shifting sand was.
With the new asphalt highway in place, the plank road was abandoned in the desert. It slowly disappeared under the sand and was torn up by scavengers wanting its timbers. But Ed Fletcher had shown what could be done with just a little imagination and a lot of determination. Roads can present engineers with major challenges, particularly when the terrain adds to construction problems. The incredible efforts of the 19th century engineers who created the Grand Goulet road in France ended in collapse and death in 2005. It now lays abandoned.
The Grand Goulet is closed today, and understandably so. It's dangerous. The question is, what do we do about that? Do we go in and bulldoze a wider road and put up ropes so it's safe and everyone can go experience it? Or do we let this perfect moment in time, this romantic journey and the memory of it, the photographs of it, do we let it live on as is? I think we do.
The Mam Tor road in northern England never stopped sliding down the mountain and was eventually deemed too dangerous in 1979 and closed. Ironically, in the case of the plank road across the sandy desert in California and Arizona, the most unstable surface of all proved to be less of a problem than it first seemed, with a modern tarmacked highway now in its place.
Ed Fletcher managed to bring together a nation by bridging that gap between Arizona and San Diego, which otherwise could have just been left and never have developed as they have today.
But of all the road projects, it is the 52-tunnel road that has really stood the test of time. Abandoned for 60 years, it was rediscovered in the 1970s. By that time, its tunnels were blocked with debris, and most of the routes had fallen away. Volunteers cleared out the tunnels and repaired the surface. And every year, the volunteers and tourists return as a memorial to the thousands of men who died in these mountains, to remember their towering engineering achievement.
Solamente a molta distanza dalla guerra le persone hanno cominciato a apprezzare quello che sono state queste opere incredibilmente realizzate in queste montagne, e quindi hanno ricominciato a visitare i campi di battaglia, anche nel ricordo dei padri che avevano combattuto qui.
The engineers who built the 52-tunnel road in Italy spoke not just for themselves, but for every road builder over the last 2 centuries. From Fletcher's Desert Plank Road in the United States, to the death-defying workers of the Grand Goulet Pass in France, and even the poor souls who battled against nature to create the Mam Tor route in northern England. An inscription carved into the rock above the tunnel entrance reads, "The names of those who make great works will be remembered forever."